Mont Ventoux, in the southeast of France, will be one of the focal points for the 2021 Tour de France, when Stage 11 climbs and descends its desolate and daunting slopes not once, but twice. The Ventoux, well, it's iconic. A strange and extreme mountain of baking heat and high winds, it stands alone, overlooking the Rhone Valley, the final ripple in the rumpled quilt of the Alpine chain of peaks. The Giant of Provence, as it is known by some people, is so identifiable that pilots flying south towards the Mediterranean coast use its bleached summit as a reference point. The vast, unmistakable bulk of the mountain, well, it dominates the rolling landscape of the Drôme and the Vaucluse regions of southern France. The mountain, once dubbed the killer climb by l'équipe, is equally prominent in the minds of all cyclists. Snow-covered in winter, arid as a desert in summer, Mont Ventoux has become the Everest of cycling. The Ventoux is unlike any other climb. It's intimidating and it's unforgiving, but also inspiring in its extremes. It has a unique smell in the heat of summer. Hot tarmac, cypress trees, lavender, eucalyptus and herbs. After an electric storm, steam rises off the road and there is a taste of metal in the air. In the Tour, it is almost always a stage made for drama and suffering. It is on the bucket list of almost every cyclist, a climb to be feared and survived, but rarely conquered. A climb where there is always drama and sometimes there is tragedy. Infamously, Tom Simpson, a former world champion and BBC Sports Personality of the Year, he collapsed and died near the barren summit during the 1967 Tour de France. Since then, the Giant has been synonymous both with a daunting challenge, but also with cycling's struggle to overcome its ethical demons. In this podcast, we talk to those who love the Ventoux and even those who sometimes hate it. Among our guests is Tom Simpson's daughter Joanne, who shares her memories of Tom, her late father. EF Education Nippo team boss Jonathan Vaughters, who once held the speed record for the brutal climb, and French journalist Julien Prétot, currently covering the Tour for Reuters. Joining me is The Guardian's Tour de France correspondent Jeremy Whittle, also author of Ventoux, Sacrifice and Suffering on the Giant of Provence. So Jeremy, when did you first develop an obsession with the Ventoux and why?
Well, it's a long time ago. I first went on holiday there in 1987, which was also the year that the Tour had a time trial up there. And we had our bikes and we kind of rode around the mountain. We rode up the mountain and kind of discovered all the villages and the grandeur of the climb, and then stood at the roadside and watched the Tour come past. And it kind of just really solidified the mountain as this kind of lightning rod for my love of cycling, really, because it was such a spectacular day. There was such kind of drama in Jean-François Bernard, was the French rider who won the stage, and he did look like he was dying as he neared the summit. He was in a real state. He'd gone so fast up the mountain, and since then it's really just been a fixture in my life. And I think it's an extraordinary place, very atmospheric, brooding, daunting, by turns really beautiful. Other times it can be very threatening.
Cycling is full of all of those adjectives you just used, of myths, of daunting, of brutal. Do you think the Ventoux actually fulfills all of those words?
I think it does, yeah, because there's no other mountain that seems to inspire such extreme events. And even when it was first used in the Tour in the 1950s, which was when the first real appearance in major stage races was at that time. Even then, very earlier on, there were kind of riders who underestimated it. That you get extreme heat there, you get very high winds, and riders seem to often have problems in the forest as you climb up on the classic south side of the ascent. In 1955, a rider called Jean Malajac, a French rider, collapsed and he had to be revived at the side of the road. Eddy Merckx in 1970, he had to be given oxygen, and of course famously we had the tragic loss of Tom Simpson in 1967. So whenever we go to the Ventoux, normally with the Tour, there's hundreds of thousands of fans there and there's always drama.
There is indeed, including Chris Froome, who had to jog up it one year.
That's right, yes, that's right. I mean, that was the most kind of, well, I suppose that was kind of tragicomic, really, rather than anything else, because it was very, very odd seeing the leader of the Tour kind of doing that kind of, if you ever tried walking in racing shoes is bad enough, but if you try running in them, especially if you haven't got anything on the cleats of your shoes, running uphill, that seemed to be kind of one of the most extreme moments we've ever seen a yellow jersey go through.
Well, the Ventoux, always full of drama. And while you've been in the press room, Jeremy, you've caught up with Julien Prétot, who's chatted about his experience at the mountain and why it has such a hold on the imagination.
I have personal reminiscence of the Ventoux because I climbed it twice, so they're not very good memories. Once from Bédouin, which was absolutely awful, and the other time was from Sceaux, actually, which is just like the tour riders are going to do, and that was much, much better, yeah. But no, they're good memories. They're good memories. A lot of suffering, but that's what you get on the bike for.
That's right, and of course the Bédouin climb is the classic climb that the Tour loves now, and that they kind of return to when they go back there. There's always big emphasis on coming up that side because it's the famous side, and of course the side where Tom Simpson died as well. But the climb up from Sceaux is the kind of definitely the easy option, isn't it? Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you always end up on Chalet Renard, so then the second part is very hard. The first part is about, 15 kilometers, I think, 14, 15 kilometers, which are pretty, well, let's say relatively easy, yeah, indeed, compared to the first kilometers from Bédouin, which are absolutely awful, like 8, 9, 10%. Never one single, meter of flat road, and it's an absolute nightmare.
Was it a boiling hot day when you did it, or was it not in the summer?
It was in August.
Oh dear. But afterwards you weren't. You survived, did you? Dive in the pool and a cold drink afterwards.
That's exactly what I did. I just made myself a very good homemade pesto, and and then relaxed, for a couple of days. Not even relaxed, just crashed.
So it's a mountain that kind of inspires both, great respect and also a degree of fear, I think, even with the riders, and a double ascent of it in July. I mean, if it's hot when we get to the Ventoux, it could be 35, 40 degrees even that afternoon. I mean, these guys now, they have great science, great sports science, great nutrition. You'd think even the Ventoux wouldn't put the fear of God into them. But I've got the feeling that people are quite nervous about it.
I'm not so sure because, the problem we have, once again, we go to these, iconic mountains or iconic climbs, and I mean, the finish is not on the top. So the finish is going to be on Malocène, on the bottom of the third, option for an ascent of the Ventoux. So I'm not sure, the race is going to go crazy in the Ventoux, but the descent is pretty tricky and pretty, pretty fast. So things might happen actually in the descent more than in the climb. Because, I mean, especially the first climb, they're probably going to, spare themselves because, especially, like you said, if it's a hot day, nobody's going to risk, attacking. Well, we'll see, but like we discussed it already, there's always something happening on the Ventoux, a lot of times. So, we'll see.
It's one of those climbs that it fits the mythical status of the Tour. What does it mean to French cycling fans and to the French in general when the Tour goes up there? Is it a big deal for French people?
I think it's more a big deal for for people riding their bikes up the Ventoux. It's really iconic for them. In terms of what it means to the race, I think it doesn't have the status that l'Alpe d'Huez or the Galibier or Tourmalet have. I mean, not because of the climb itself, but I think mostly because the Tour doesn't go there that often. Mm. So, okay, there's a lot of big stories, but there's many, many more stories on the Tourmalet, the Galibier, l'Alpe d'Huez. And there's also the fact that I think it's hard to access it as a fan. I mean, you always get, it's more, people, they're more lining up the road and I don't know, maybe because by fear of this climb that they're very... There's a religious side to it. We're going to watch the riders climb, this iconic climb. But if you go to l'Alpe d'Huez, it's just a stadium. You don't have that in the Ventoux. The one time when they let too many people on the Ventoux, I mean, remember what happened. It was 2016.
So we're talking about when Froome had to start running, yeah.
Yeah, it might happen to him as well again this year.
Well, a lot of people are saying that is he going to have to run up or walk up the Ventoux again? But I think that's a bit unfair, isn't it? I mean, I know he's struggling, but he should be better than that. So you think most of the action will happen on the descent? I know that descent quite well. It's very, as you say, it's very fast. Can be pretty dangerous as well, can't it?
Yeah, I think more on the descent. I mean, obviously we'll see, where we're at, in the race. Is there going to be one of the top 4 or 5 favorites. Already in a big need, massive need to make up for some lost time. Earlier in the race. Then I don't know.
So the last thing wanted to ask you is you're one of the Presham's kind of bon viveurs. You're a gastronome, a wine lover, and I mean I was slightly in awe of the kind of restaurants you managed to squirrel out when you're on the tour, and even have time to go and enjoy them. But do you have anything set up for the night of the Ventoux? Because obviously that area is particularly well known for wine and food. We're very close to Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Gigondin and Vaquerin and all those great wines. Do you have anything set up that evening?
I haven't planned it yet, but I know what I'm going to get. I'm probably going to go settle for a bottle of Côte de Ventoux, actually. Pretty simple, but they have very, very good ones. So I have to do my homework before we get there.
Okay. Well, if it all fails, you can join me at the pizza van for a cold beer. Julien, thank you.
Julien Prétot there. Well, some pro riders thrive on the Ventoux, others just can't cope with the brutal gradient and the often baking heat. Former professional Tyler Hamilton once described racing to the summit as like breathing through a straw. There are tales of riders, both amateur and professional, underestimating the climbing, having a major crisis towards the summit. Jeremy, you've heard these stories, haven't you?
Yeah, over the years when I was researching my book, obviously there's some really well-known stories. There's some lesser-known stories as well. The 1955 tour seemed to be the moment when everybody realised just how ferocious a climb it could be, especially if the mercury climbed to kind of 35, 40 degrees, which it often does down there in that part of France. And there's this famous story of Ferdy Kubler, the Swiss rider, who at the time was in his mid-30s, who hadn't got any experience of the Ventoux at all. And he attacked to the bottom of the climb, despite being warned by some of his peers that was a bit foolish. And he was kind of zigzagging towards the top and drooling, and when he got down the descent the other side, I don't know if this is entirely true or not, but supposedly he crashed into a ditch, then staggered into a bar and ordered some beer, and then set off in the wrong direction.
It is a mountain that seems to do strange things to people.
Well, yeah, and obviously, whenever we're there, as I said earlier, we seem to have these extreme conditions, and we've had a situation when the year that Froome, for example, had to run. I was on a motorbike, actually on a press motorbike that afternoon, and we arrived at the finish. They pulled the finish down from the summit to Chalet Reynard, which is the kind of ski station, kind of cafe area, just before the final 6K of the climb start, which is the most exposed part, the really famous exposed part of the mountain. And we were down there, and they brought all the fans down as well because the summit was so dangerous. And what was going on at the summit with this kind of 120 mile an hour wind was unbelievable. We had to drive over the top to get back down again because they wouldn't let us go back down the way the race had come. So we had to go over the top, and all the team buses did as well. And I remember hearing from Team Sky that their bus had been hit by such strong gusts of wind that the riders had been lying on the floor, scared stiff, because they thought the bus was going to be rolled over the edge of the mountain. And when anybody who's been up at the summit of the Ventoux knows that the wind there can be really, really terrifying, and there's lots of stories of people who have been hiking on the Ventoux being blown off the top, camper vans being blown off the top, cyclists lying down behind a wall to avoid being blown away, literally. So it's a fearsome place. If you get it wrong, if you're up there at the wrong time, you can be in real trouble.
But there is one pro rider who did relish the climb, and that was EF Education Nippo team boss Jonathan Vaughters, once the record holder for the Ventoux, a performance that he now admits was both fraudulent and also an epiphany of the sorts as he vowed to change direction when standing on the summit. Here he is talking to Jeremy as the 2021 tour got underway.
I'm here with Jonathan Vaughters, who for a long time held the speed record for the ascent of the Ventoux. And Jonathan, you've got a soft spot for that part of France, I know, and for the wines and the cuisine. But what is it about the Ventoux that particularly makes it such a special, memorable mountain?
Well, I mean, it's a standalone mountain, which is actually, there aren't so many of those in Europe, meaning most of the time mountain, they're part of the Alps or part of the Pyrenees. The Ventoux kind of just sits out on its own. It's a little bit of a lonely old man. Maybe a lonely old woman, I don't know. It's hot and dry, and the tree line is actually fairly low on the Ventoux. The gradient of the Ventoux is actually really steady, unlike a lot of. So there's just all these like little reasons where I was always really suited to climbing fast up the Ventoux as a rider. Like every time I went up it in a race, I did fairly well, and a lot of reasons that, to me, it's somehow it reminds me a little bit of home. And when I say home, I mean Colorado. It's just a little bit more evocative of like the climbs I sort of grew up with. Hot, high, dry.
And no hairpins. Oh, well, 2 or 3.
Yeah, really no switchbacks. It's a different sort of climb than most of what you have in Europe.
Does the history of it, particularly, the kind of, obviously there's the kind of like history of a few hundred years ago, and when it was kind of thought to be inhabited by dragons and demons by the locals, and then Petrarch, French poet, climbed it, and then it became this kind of mythical ascent, and the road wasn't built until the late 1900s, and so on and so forth. And then cycling's got its own history. It didn't use it. It was one of the later climbs to be adopted by the Tour, post-war adoption. And then obviously those history of kind of like trauma and drama on the Ventoux, collapses, and famously Tom Simpson, and even Chris Froome running up the Ventoux. I mean, it's a place where there's always drama, and you had your own kind of personal drama there, didn't you? An epiphany of sorts at the summit.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting you put it that way, and there'll be drama this year in the Tour de France. So the first time that it ever climbs it twice. That'll actually be interesting. But yeah, at the top of the Ventoux, when I set the record up there and won the race, it was a funny little moment for me personally. Although I've really come to love the region and love the mountain, but at that moment, when I was sitting on top of the podium in the Dauphiné, and you can see it in the photos, I'm sticking my tongue out, and I'm not taking it seriously because, it was like a joke to me. I mean, it was a little bit just sort of like, okay, well, I won, but like we all know, at least inside the sport at that point in time, we all know how I won, and we know how everyone was going up the mountains that fast, and it just appeared to me a little bit of a moment of when I realized, that the puppet strings were where they were and what they looked like, and so it wasn't a gratifying victory. I mean, it felt mechanical, meaning, I had done my job that day. I had done what was expected of me. And the other riders, that were around me, whatever, Lance and Vinokurov and, whatever, they had also done their job and done what was expected of them. And it seemed very artificial, which to me in spirit, the Ventoux is anything but artificial. I mean, it's a mountain about, really testing the limits of your body, and I suppose we did that in one form, but it didn't. I don't know. That victory did not have very much appeal for me, even though that is still my favorite part of France, and and I love that mountain, and I love the heat in the summer and the lavender of Provence, but and I love the wine from there, but that victory doesn't stick out in my mind, other than that was sort of the start of me just seeing the puppet show and the puppet strings for what it was.
So this year, obviously, as you say, we've got the two ascents. I guess the first one, I'm expecting it to be not that, people will be kind of like, I'm guessing the riders won't kill themselves the first time up. It'll be the second time up with the descent down the other side. Do you think we're going to see significant gaps and kind of, is it going to be a pivotal stage, or is it going to be a kind of a shadow boxing stage?
Well, the first time up obviously is a shallower gradient, coming from the other side. It depends on the heat. If it's below 30 degrees that day, it'll be like you just said, it'll be a hard stage, and it'll be a group of 20 or whatever at the finish, and maybe a breakaway, maybe not, but it won't be like an absolutely decisive mountain stage. Maybe not 20, but 15, 10. If it's a 40-degree day, which it can be at that time of year in that part of the world, just beating hot sun 40-degree day, it will be a decisive stage. That it'll change the race, but it has to be really hot for that day to truly change the race.
That was Jonathan Vaughters. He refers to the puppet show there, Jeremy. Obviously, he's talking about his own experience of doping, but that experience also changed him, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it did, because I worked on a book on his only book that he's done so far with him, and in that he talked about winning that time trial, but knowing that it was, well, kind of fake because he had been doping. And also standing at the top of the mountain, I mean, which is a remarkable place, because it feels like sometimes when you're up there, you can see the whole of the world laid out at your feet. And having this kind of, really powerful moment where, well, I've reached the top of this mountain, this is the peak of my career, but I didn't do it the way I wanted to do it, and I have to change from now on. And I think that was kind of one of the founding moments for him, really developing a conscience about being anti-doping. And obviously he was an influential player ultimately in the US ADA investigation into Lance Armstrong. And I think that the first moment where he started to really think, I can't continue like this, was when he won on the top of the Ventoux.
Well, talking of Lance Armstrong, considering he bent the Tour de France to his will for so many years, he never conquered the Ventoux, did he?
No, and he tried very hard, and they did lots of research. He and his team did lots of research into why he couldn't win on the Ventoux. I mean, he could have won, ironically, in 2000 when he raced up there with Marco Pantani, but they had a very troubled relationship, or a very kind of spiky relationship. And in an effort to smooth the way and to win Pantani over, or to mollify Pantani, I guess, perhaps that's the right phrase, he kind of sat up to let Pantani win the stage. And it totally backfired, because Pantani was a very proud, kind of stubborn Italian mentality. He had that kind of mentality, and he was just insulted, and it actually made things worse between them.
Yet perhaps the most hotly debated incident in the Ventoux's history was in July 1967, when, in one of the Tour's most painful moments, Tom Simpson collapsed and died a little over a kilometre from the summit. Like many others, Simpson had always struggled there, the heat, thin air and unrelenting gradient seemingly overpowering him. Here, reading an extract from his book, Put Me Back on My Bike, in search of Tom Simpson, is William Fotheringham describing his visit to the Simpson Memorial close to the Ventoux summit.
As you approach the memorial, retracing Simpson's final miles, the road snakes across the bare scree slopes. The thinness of the air begins to make itself felt in your lungs. There is a slight sensation of breathlessness to add to the sheer effort of getting the pedals round after almost 2 hours climbing without a let-up. To the right, the great mass of sun-baked limestone soars into the sky. Far below, to the left, what looks like the whole of Provence is on display, with row after row of rolling blue hills to the south. As the road crosses the mountainside, still climbing steeply, a series of vast U-shaped bends goes into the heart of the rocks and out again onto the shoulders of the summit. These great bowls are natural sun traps, where the sun's heat bounces off the bleached rocks. They feel like a succession of vast natural kilns, as if designed to draw in the maximum amount of heat. The last of these, which is also the largest, is 1¼ miles from the observatory, just below the point where Simpson took his last breath, with his objective for the day within reach, just a few minutes away. The memorial stands to the left, a kilometre before the summit. Here, the road on which Simpson wobbled to a halt for the last time is so steep that merely walking up it is an effort. The granite profile of a cyclist with the words Olympic medalist, world champion, British sporting ambassador was paid for by a subscription fund launched by Cycling magazine the week after Simpson died. The feet of the faithful have worn the stone leading up to the monument into rough steps, giving it a much visited feel, rather like the amply marked grave of Jim Morrison in the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris, and with a similar pile of offerings. To the right of Julian Barnes, it was the tumultuous altar of some popular, if dubious, Catholic saint. In an echo of the thousands who used to struggle up the Ventoux to pay their respects in the chapel of the Holy Cross, people on bikes now come from all over the world, drawn by the memorial and the mountain. It is hard to tell which is uppermost in their minds. When the tour visits, they flock in their hundreds of thousands, to the consternation of the local ecologists. On a midweek day in mid-August, the 21st century pilgrims are there in all shapes, sizes and ages. Slender adolescent youths on second-hand gitanes, handed down from the 1980s. Marco Pantani wannabes in full team replica kit, fat old cyclotourists on tired-looking bikes with bellies bulging in their jerseys, club cyclists from every corner of France and Britain. They race, huff and puff and wobble. In some cases they walk up, painfully pushing their bikes. Often, husbands are followed by their wives. Patiently, the women overtake their other halves every few minutes in their Renault Clio, shout encouragement from the lay-by, and take photographs as if the hubby is riding his own private miniature Tour de France. For all of them, and all of us, the ritual ends with a brief halt at the memorial, a slippery walk up the rocks in stiff-soled cycling shoes to leave the obligatory souvenir, a coffee in the bar by the observatory, and a long look at the view before they put the bike on the cart roof rack.
William Fotheringham there. Tom Simpson wanted to one day win the Tour de France, to be a superstar, to be as loved back home as the Beatles or England football captain Bobby Moore. But as he entered the twilight of his career, financially committed to a Corsican property deal and desperately trying to negotiate a lucrative sponsorship contract, the Ventoux was just too much for him. According to media reports, his death was caused by heat exhaustion and dehydration. But there was also a lingering reputation for amphetamine use, although some close to him, including his daughter Joanne, still contest that this caused his demise. The debate over how Simpson should be remembered as a flawed but courageous hero, a former champion of the classics, Paris-Nice and the World Road Race, or as another example of professional sports ethical malaise, well, that still continues. His story ensures, however, that of all of the mountains in cycling, it is the Ventoux that casts the longest of shadows. His daughter Joanne has long defended her father's name, who contests the media narrative that his death was directly attributed to amphetamines rather than dehydration or heat exhaustion. Remembering her dad is both painful and moving for her, as Jeremy found out when he interviewed her at her home in Belgium.
So I'm here with Joanne Simpson, daughter of Tom Simpson, and obviously every time the tour goes back to Mont Ventoux, it's a very special moment in her life. How does it make you feel, Joanne, when the tour returns to Mont Ventoux?
Just special. Just I can't imagine that my life changed through the Ventoux. I've got a love-hate relationship with it, so it's it's still special when they go over.
So all those when they announce the route every autumn, all those feelings start to flood in, do they?
Yeah, a bit. But every 5 years I do something myself anyway with the Ventoux. So I just love looking forward to it.
What you said you do something every 5 years? What, like a ride to the mountain, or you have some kind of celebration of his memory?
I don't want to be, the day itself, the 13th of July, Mum and I always call each other. Always. We've done that for years, 40 years on end. We always call each other that day. But in 97, it was the first time I went up the Ventoux on the bike. I heard this Belgian singer over here saying that he was going up the Ventoux. This was in 96. He was going to go up the Ventoux with his wife. Now, I'd seen his wife before, and I thought, well, Jesus, if she can do it, why can't I? And I sort of set my mind to it. And I trained the whole year in 96, told Mum and Barry that I was going to do it. They thought, well, not a very good idea, my mum saying, I don't want to put a second memorial up the mountain, not for you, sort of thing. Please, you don't have to do it. But I thought, yeah, I do have to do it. It was sort of something that, I don't know, it was something that told me you have to do it. You have to go up that mountain. You have to finish that 1.3 kilometers that Dad didn't do. So I did that. Trained the whole year, just around here around where I live. Went up, and it was such a magical feeling. Just a magical feeling. Had a row with my mum and Barry the night before because they thought, this is going to be so hard for her. They were protecting me.
So, Joanne, you spend a lot of time and effort looking after your father's memorial on the Ventoux. It's something that's become a kind of labour of love for you, hasn't it, over the years? Will you be going to the mountain for the stage this year?
No, I won't be going this year. I'm a bit scared. I'm not I'm not completely vaccinated. So I'm not actually leaving I won't say I'm not going to leave the country without being vaccinated completely. I'm still worried a bit. So no, I won't be going to the mountain this year.
Okay, so when was the last time you were down there?
2017, when we celebrated Dad's 50th
Okay.
anniversary. Yeah.
So I remember talking to you before, and you said that you tend to go, and there's some of the mementos that people leave on the memorial you tend to keep.
Yes.
So I'm assuming you're overdue a visit then.
Yes, I'm overdue a visit, but I'm going back in 2022. That's for sure. The Simpsons go retro then.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to ride up on a bike on a Peugeot PX10 1963 bike, and it's all ready to go. So yes,
Wow. So that's a proper old steel frame bike.
yes, it is. I have to. It's a very well. I won't say uncomfortable, but it's a the handlebars are really uncomfortable. So I've still got a lot of training to do on this steel bike. Yeah.
So I've been to your house in Ghent, and happily and luckily, and I've seen the massive archive of memorabilia you've got of your dad's career and of the teams he rode for and all the wins he achieved. Do you think his memory has been served well by fans and by the media?
Sometimes it has, sometimes it hasn't. Well, they still talk about him, but sometimes in the news it's always about the wrong things. But sometimes, a lot of people don't realize what he has won and what a nice guy he was, and he looked after the journalists, and he sort of they only talk about him when there's dope going around. Yeah.
So you feel that he's talked about in too negative a terms rather than really putting him in context in terms of the achievements of his career.
Yeah, Tom Simpson. Oh, is that the guy who died at the Ventoux? Yeah, as if that's the only thing he did.
Yeah. What do you remember of him yourself? Because you were very young, weren't you, when you lost him?
Oh, I was 4 years old, and I have one little memory. He came into the kitchen. Well, I guess it was him because he had racing gear on, and he went into the fridge. I can't put a face on it, but I can put a figure. He went into the fridge and he took out the milk bottle. And in Belgium, there were these, it was a Stabilac milk bottle with a big opening on the top with an aluminium cap on it. And he opened it and he drank out of the milk bottle. And I must have said, naughty daddy, because we weren't allowed to drink out of a bottle. But Dad did do that. So every time I see a milk bottle, that's the only memory I have, the only one.
And you were, as I say, as you said, you were extremely young when he died, and so you've had to kind of build up, I suppose, a memory of him over the years as you've grown up yourself and heard all the stories about him, and had to deal with all that media coverage, which I know you've been quite hurt by at times.
Well, I was brought up. And I, my parents told me a story that you, of course, as a daughter, you sort of believe. And then I was protected up until Barry stopped racing. Barry, that's my second dad, of course, stopped racing in 1980. And Mum and Barry went back to England. And I stayed on in Belgium because I wanted to study. And then up until I was 17, I was really protected. Nobody, I didn't hear anything, hardly anything negative or anything. But all of a sudden, when I lived by myself here in Belgium, all of a sudden you sort of, wow, all this new information you get to know, and really, is that how it went? And yeah,
Must have been a big shock for you.
yeah, it was because I couldn't believe that I was 17, 18 years old, and I didn't know anything, or my parents must have not told the truth. And getting older, I mean, I'm the one that wants to know the truth.
Yes, yeah. You've actively pursued the truth, haven't you, in recent years, because you got fed up with reading the kind of speculation and the hearsay, and
Yes,
he said this and
yes,
she said
I
that
have.
about your dad, and
Oh,
you pursued the autopsy report, didn't you, from the hospital in Avignon?
yes, yeah, yeah. Nor my mum, nor the Tour de France, nor anybody else could show me the autopsy report, because I was so fed up of reading all these negative media things in the newspaper. And then, every time something came up, I asked that journalist, oh, so you must have the autopsy report, because I surely don't have it, seeing the truth, seeing you're writing it. And I always think, well, the autopsy report won't lie. Even if it was good or bad, I don't really care, but it's at least the truth.
Yeah, and that's something. I mean, when we've talked before, you've said very passionately that you love your dad, obviously, and
Of
but you
course.
just want to know exactly what happened rather than
Yeah,
having to
yeah,
deal with kind of mythology and
yeah,
hearsay.
yeah. Knowing his character, of course, because Mum always says, God, you're just like your father. And, I must have done something wrong, or done something that she, I don't know, but she always says, oh, you're just like your father. So I think, he must have been also really stubborn, and wanted to get what he wanted to get, like myself. And not give up, of course. So, yeah.
But when you pursued the autopsy report, I understand that you had no luck with that because of the rules surrounding autopsies in France. What exactly happened?
They wrote me back, and everything was destroyed in 97, 30 years after he died.
So that's their kind of statute of limitations on autopsies, is it?
Yeah, well, apparently. I thought it would have been 50, but yeah, it's not. Yeah, everything was destroyed in 97, so I have to live with it,
That must have been very hard to accept. That must have been very disappointing for you.
Well, I was disappointing, but, hard to accept.
So finally, let's end on a positive note, because obviously I know, as you said earlier at the start when we first started talking, you were talking about your love-hate relationship with the mountain. But when you go there, I mean, it's an extraordinary place. This massive mountain set among the vines and the olive groves and the Rhone Valley. It rises out of the plain like a pyramid. Very spectacular place. How do you feel inside about the mountain itself? Is it somewhere is it a holy place for you because it's where you lost your dad, or is it somewhere that you feel kind of you reconnect with him?
I feel one. I feel it's sort of my mountain, and everybody can use it, I feel like I feel like privileged every time I sit on the steps. Then I think, Jesus, Dad, what a view, You've just chosen the best place in this world. And I can sit on the steps and just I get my great ideas from there, and I just love going there. Love looking after the monuments. Just love being there. Yeah, I'd like to spend a night in a camper van one year, maybe next year, on top of the mountain, just for the night, one night.
Oh, that sounds a great idea. You get very spectacular sunrises there as well. I'm
Yeah.
sure you know that.
Well, I've never been there. I've never been on top of the mountain when the sun was rising. So I want to do that. Yeah,
Joanne Simpson, thank you so much.
my pleasure.
So we're coming to the end of our visit to the Ventoux. It's a place that's hard to leave because once you're hooked, that Ventoux gets under your skin. And I know that because I've ridden it and I loved it. It was an amazing place to visit, as ethereal as everyone says. So Jeremy, to wrap us up, 30 years after you first tackled it, do you still ride the mountain?
Well, I'm not fit enough, really, I don't think, and I'm a little bit slower these days. But I mean, I do, I do the soft side, as I call it, which is the side that they're actually going up first in the Tour de France stage this year, up from a village called Sceaux on the Plateau de Sceaux, which is among all the lavender fields. It's very, very scenic, very beautiful. But it's a shallower climb. It's long, but it's not such a stiff gradient. So if I'm going up the Ventoux, that's the way I go, which is not very macho of me, really. But hey, I don't care anymore.
And if you are going to go up the harder way, via Chalet Reynard, pray for a tailwind. So Mont Ventoux, loved and hated, tragic and romantic, but always unforgettable. Thanks to our guests and interviewees. To close, here is a short extract from Jeremy's book, Ventoux, Sacrifice and Suffering on the Giant of Provence. See you next time.
Charles Gaulle always liked forests and mountains. When he retired from racing, he became a hermit for a while, living in a woodman's hut in the Ardennes forest, hunting most days and living without running water or electricity. I spent my days planting vegetables, Gaulle recalled after he rejoined the real world. Roe deer would come and graze at the bottom of my garden. There was nothing but trees and water. Gaulle, who had worked in an abattoir before turning professional, was at home at altitude. It's beautiful up high in the mountains and the views are fantastic. I feel happy up there. The south side of the Ventoux, cloaked in deep dark forest, populated by deer and wild boar, leads ever upward until it emerges into the white light to offer panoramic views of the south of France, far below. It might have been created with Charles Gaulle in mind. There are two maverick climbers who embody the existential ideal of the haunted loner, exercising his demons in splendid isolation as he races upwards towards the glowering peaks. One was Charles Gaulle and the other, Marco Pantani. Both were angst-ridden and tormented. Both were loners and both feuded with the other stars of their era. Both men also won Tour de France stages on the Ventoux. On the eve of Bastille Day in 1958, the 21.6 kilometres from Bédoin to the summit of the Ventoux were lined by 100,000 people. While Gaulle had set his heart on a stage win, intrigue surrounded relations between the three French stars, Raphaël Geminiani, Louison Bobet and Jacques Anquetil. Gaulle had already shocked Anquetil by winning the first time trial in Châteaulin, and the absence of rest days seemed to suit a rider who was growing in strength and purpose as the tour went on. As he rounded the fearsome bend at Saint-Estève, Gaulle, in stark contrast with Federico Bahamontes and Anquetil, who had already been forced to stand on the pedals to maintain their speed, stayed, sat in the saddle. He began tackling the Ventoux's toughest section and quickly closed on Bobet, who had started immediately before him. He rode relentlessly through the airless forest, fixated on revenge, closing on Bobet's rear wheel until he drew level. He stared straight ahead as he passed Bobet, and was soon well beyond him. Gaulle's time for the climb on a bike that weighed 13 kilos, of 1 hour, 2 minutes and 9 seconds, stood as a record until Jonathan Vaughters, racing for US Postal in 1999, beat it 31 years later. But Gaulle, like Hugo Coblet in 1951, never attained such heights again. There were, like his peers, tales of amphetamine abuse, with one account of Gaulle's growing disenchantment making its way into French sports paper L'Équipe. One evening in Saint-Gaudens during the 1962 Tour de France, Gaulle spoke to his teammate Marcel Enzer. "You know, Marcel, I'm scared now," Gaulle said. "Scared of what?" Enzer replied. "There are too many guys blundering around because they're on stimulants. They can't react properly." Gaulle was thinking of Roger Rivière, who had fallen into a ravine on the Col du Pergeret in 1960, his reactions hampered by an over-reliance on doping. Rivière's injuries confined him to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. The warning signs were now everywhere. Gaulle knew it, and so did Pierre Dumas, the Tour's doctor, seen crouching over the stricken Jean Melajac on the Ventoux in July 1955. But nobody, it seemed, was willing to act on them.